Is going on, guys? Welcome to the Only Football Podcast. My name is Kyle, and we mentioned it in a couple past videos, but now it's kind of all being put together here. The strength of schedule needed to be changed. It was only accounting for last year's wins and losses. We know on average there will be about 3 new teams in the playoffs every year. So I wanted to make something that was more accurate. If you are a fan of a team in the NFC North, like Rick, the Bears, my family, the Packers, don't know any Minnesota fans. Actually, I know one, more of an acquaintance, but this is your lucky day because what I'm going to do, I was looking for the most practical way to release this, and I thought if I did the entire NFL all at one time, it would just by the end of it, it would just sound like numbers. And I wanted to kind of keep it small. So I decided to go by division. Okay. And I want to start by letting you know what the NFL has on their strength of schedule. The NFL did their own, like I said, very flawed, but the NFL, the order that the NFL has, um, in the order from hardest to easiest is Chicago, Minnesota, Detroit, and the Green Bay Packers. Now, the one I did, this is the order: Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit, and Chicago. So, as you can see, Minnesota and Detroit at second and third place. Me and the NFL's order, it agrees. But look, I think some of this is just chance. And the reason I think it's chance is because what we disagree on couldn't be more the opposite. They have Chicago with the hardest. I have Chicago with the easiest. They have Green Bay with the um, easiest. I have Green Bay with the hardest. Okay, so what exactly did I ultimately end up doing? Well, it's very simple. Okay. It's a point system. Okay. I went through the every opponent that the NFC North plays. I went through the Bears, the Vikings, the Lions, and the Packers. And I wrote down all their opponents and I wrote down the over under of the 2023-24 season. And that was kind of my base starting point. Okay. And to make this really simple, all I did was if you played 2 away games in a row, I added 2 points. If you played 3 away games in a row, I add 3 points. If you're playing a team coming off of a bye, I added 2 points. If the team you're playing that's coming off of a bye, if they're at home, I added 3 points. And then if you had 2 home games in a row, I subtracted, right? Because that's your advantage. So I subtracted 2 points. Home 3 in a row, I'll subtract 3. And basically, the simplest way to explain it is the higher the number, the more difficult it is. Because if I have to add a lot, that means you're playing a lot of back to back. That means, you're playing a lot of teams coming off buys and things of that nature. Not to mention that you're already starting with the over under of the teams. So even if we only use the over under, I could still probably give you a good idea on whose schedule is harder. Um, but it would be very close since they all have the same opponents for the most part. The last thing to include here is that I wrote down every away game. Konnichiwa, what is going on, Steve? Glad to have you in here. I wrote down every away game for the Bears, the Lions, the Packers, and the Lions, the NFC North. Okay. And I looked at how long the flights are. So I added up all of the flight time. And basically, the way that works is 1 hour equals 1 point. So an example of this is the Raiders. Okay. The Raiders, Las Vegas is 3 hours and 34 minutes away from Green Bay. So that equaled a 3 point. Where did it go? Bears, sorry. I just lost the Raiders. So that equals a 3.56, okay? Because 3 for the 3 hours it takes to get to Vegas, and then 34 minutes, a little over half of an hour is the reason that it went up to, because it's out of 10. So if it's, to make it very simple, if it's a 3.5 hour flight, I'm going to add 3.5. Okay. So that is the way it worked. And then all I did was add 1 point for every time zone that's being jumped. So the 4 or 5 factors that went into this. How many these are the things that made me add or subtract points, okay? We start with the over under going into this year. If you play 2 back-to-back games on the road, I add 2 points. If you're playing a team coming off of a bye, I add 2 points, and I add 3 points if that team is at home. Okay? And then I just added the amount of hours you're flying and the amount of time zones that you're going through. And the way that it shook up here is that Green Bay had a total score of 180.49. That put him in first place in their division. Okay. And I'll break that down a little more in depth, but basically they have 16 hours and 38 minutes of flying. And, I'll just tell you, there's a lot of games in here that the point values at 11 and a half, 11 and a half, 14 and a half, 13. I mean, these are a lot of, hard games that they're going to have to play. The Detroit Lions actually came in third place with 165.99. So there's your separation right there, 20-point differential. And then I have the Minnesota Vikings in second place with 173.76. And then the Bears in fourth with 160.26. So, I mean, the Bears in the NFL strength of schedule have the hardest schedule. But if you actually look at it, break it down practically, they have the easiest schedule. So I'll start with the easiest. Okay. Oh, one last thing. For the home opener, if you're playing at home, I minus 2 points. If you're playing on the road, then I added 2 points. Okay. So the Bears are actually 158.26. And this is why the Bears were able to keep their score so low. They open at home against the Packers. They go on the road to play Tampa. They're staying only one time zone actually. Yeah, they're in Central, so they're going to Eastern, and it's a 2-hour flight. So Tampa is a 6.5 favorite, or not favorite, 6.5 win over under on the season. And then I added 2.18 for the flight time, and then add 1 for the time zone, and it takes the game to a 9.68. Then they play the Kansas City Chiefs on the road. This is their highest total for any game. They're playing Kansas City, who's an 11.5. I'm always going to start with the amount of games that teams are projected to win. Kansas City's 11.5 plus 2 points because it's a back-to-back away game. Plus 1.10 for flight time equals 14.6. So that is their hardest game. Then they come back home to play Denver. That's an 8.5. Then at Washington, 6.5 plus 1.35 for flight time. That's a 7.85. So now that you understand the way I added it, I'm just going to tell you the totals. The Raiders, 5.5. Now that might seem pretty low, but the Raiders are a 7.5 win total team this year, and this is their second game at home in a row. So I minus 2. The Chargers, 13.42. The Saints, 13.36. The Carolina Panthers, 7.5. The Detroit Lions, 10.3. Minnesota, 11.6. And then Detroit, they hit the bye week. Then Detroit's a 9. Cleveland's a 9. Arizona, a 5 and a 5. And then Green Bay at an 8.61. The Bears have no games against any team coming off of a bye week. Okay. If you look at their away games that they have, Their longest flight is to LA, which is 3 hours and 55 minutes, but most of their flights are within an hour. You got Chicago flying to Detroit, Minnesota, Green Bay. For the most part, this division is pretty close to each other. So none of these teams are really flying too far. It's not like, Denver's got to go to Vegas. It's not short, but it's not long either. Um, but there's just certain teams that don't have it as lucky. Like think about the Dolphins; they have to fly to Boston to play their divisional opponent. These guys are all within an hour of each other. So Green Bay, Cleveland, Minnesota, Detroit, even New Orleans is only an hour and 52 minutes. Washington's an hour and 21 minutes. Kansas City's an hour and 6 minutes. This is part of being in the Midwest. You're really close to everything, but nobody in the NFC North has it better than Chicago. So this definitely comes into play when you're talking about predicting how well the Bears are going to do. If you look at the strength of schedule the NFL released, only using last year's data, you would think that the Bears have the hardest schedule because of who they play. Now, I want to really drive this point home. Who you play is important, but it's not important all on its own. It's important to know when you play teams, who those teams are coming off of playing. Let's say you played a physical team like San Francisco. They beat the crap out of you, and then the next week you play that team. That's advantage for you. They're playing no team coming off of a bye week, not even one. And they're not flying very far. They got one game on the West Coast where they have to fly all the way to LA. All their other games, their next furthest flight is 2 hours and 11 minutes. They jump 2 time zones when they go to LA. Every other game, they either don't jump any time zones or they only jump one time zone. So, what makes that different? Let's go to the polar opposite, Green Bay, who the NFL said is the easiest of the NFC North. I have them in my algorithm, the hardest of the NFC North. Okay. For instance, week 1 at Bears, +2 because it's a home opener for the Bears, plus 1.11 for flight time. The Bears are 7.5 win to open the season. That's a 9.61. Okay. So right off the bat, you see that the same game that the Bears are playing, instead of a 9.61, it's a 7.5. Okay. And now we'll just go a little quicker. Atlanta is actually a 12.25. Now, this is kind of why I like the algorithm, because usually you just look at Green Bay versus Atlanta and you think about Atlanta, you think about Green Bay, but when there's a number to it, now I can ask myself, why is this a 12.25? Like, what makes this game a 12.25? Well, Atlanta's 7.5. This is their second back-to-back away game, second road game. They're jumping one time zone. They're flying almost 2 hours. You add all that up, and this game turns into 12.25. So little things like that, where normally you'd be inclined to, yeah, give me the Packers. Now, even if you're still going to go with the Packers, because just because you have a high number doesn't mean that that team can't win, but it should make you double take and understand that there's more to the story in the following weeks that you should know about before making your decision. The Saints is a 9.5. It stays at a 9.5 because this is the home opener for Green Bay. Then they play Detroit, so -2 back-to-back home games. So that takes Detroit from a 9 to a 7. Then at Las Vegas Raiders, this is actually a 13.6 because the Raiders are a 7.5. Plus, they're jumping 2 time zones plus over 3.5 hours of flight time. That's a 13.6. Week 7 at Denver, that's an 11.86. We just saw Chicago plays Denver at home, and it equaled 8.5 for them. The same matchup against Denver for the Packers equals 11.86 because they're jumping a time zone and they're flying almost 2.5 hours to get to Denver. Then they got Minnesota, which is an 8.5. I'm going to do the totals now. They play the Rams, which is a 5.5, but then Pittsburgh, an 11. Pittsburgh's 8.5. win total on the season. They're jumping one time zone. They're flying for an hour and a half. It's an 11. Then the Chargers, 9.5. Then Detroit, 11.5. Then Kansas City, 11.5. Okay. Then they got the Giants. Now, this game is not a game that you would think when you look at it is going to be a really tough game. But this is going to be an extremely tough game here for the Packers because the Giants are coming off of a bye. The Giants are at home. This is the Packers' second, or no, this is their first away game. But you add the flight time, the time zones, the fact that the Giants are at home, and the fact that the Giants are coming off of a bye, it takes this game to a 14.5 total. And I would think twice about picking Green Bay for that game. Then Tampa, relatively easy, 6.5. Carolina actually is at 10.5 here because they're jumping a time zone and they're flying 2 hours, and Carolina's 7.5. Minnesota is 11.7, and then finally Chicago 7.5. They get their 7.5, just like the Bears got one. But when you look at this schedule, it is clearly more not necessarily the opponents, but when you look at this schedule, there are more external factors that come into play, like 16.5 flight hours, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, we move on to Minnesota. Minnesota is kind of a fluke. They're in a prove it year because last year they get 12 wins and they finish the season with a negative point differential. So now it's kind of a prove it year for Minnesota, and they end up with the second hardest schedule in the NFC North. Tampa, and then at Philly, week 2. So that's 10.5 plus an hour and a half flight time. So that's a tough game right away. But then they play the Chargers, another tough game. And then they play Carolina on the road. So don't sleep on that Carolina game because they're hitting the road for the second time in 4 weeks. And if they don't win that game, there's a chance. If you look at this schedule, I think they can beat Tampa at home week 1. But I think they lose to Philly. They lose to the Chargers. They must beat Carolina because the next week, let's say they lose to Carolina, then they play Kansas City. You got a team that's 1-4 to start the season. Teams that start 1-4 don't make the playoffs. So if Minnesota does not start hot, there is a serious problem for Skull Nation. Richard is in the chat. What's going on, Richard? Happy to have you in here breaking down the NFC North. So yeah, right off the bat, man. And then Chicago right after that on the road. And Chicago's expected to be better this year. They added a lot of weapons. It's a divisional game and it's on the road. That's another tough game for Minnesota, but they have to win that one. They have to win that one because guess what? If they don't beat Chicago, Carolina, and Tampa, they're royally effed because right after the Chicago game, they play the 49ers. Okay. And the 49ers, this is a tough game. And then Green Bay on the road, and then back-to-back road games with Green Bay, then Atlanta on the road. I will say the one thing that has helped Minnesota's schedule a lot, because you may be thinking as I go through this, how is Minnesota not the most challenging? Well, it's because a lot of their challenging games, fortunately for them, they play at home. They get Kansas City at home. They get San Francisco at home. They get the Chargers at home. Okay. They get New Orleans at home, who's 9.5 point win total to start the season. It seems a little high, but and I think Atlanta could be a sneaky difficult team. Atlanta's at 7.5. I think that's a really good spot because you could make an argument that they're not going to win 8 games, but um, it's also possible. So I think that's a really smart spot for Vegas to put them. But I think that there's a chance they could go over that win total. Then the Saints at Denver versus Chicago. Then they hit a bye week. Here's another thing. They hit their bye week 13. Okay. So as far as bye weeks go, there's only one more week that they could have had their bye. After week 14, there is no bye weeks. So they have their bye week really, really late in the year. Chicago and Minnesota both have that week 13 late bye week. Okay. Um, so after that bye, they go. Well, I went up to look at the bye week and I lost my spot. So after that bye week, then they're at the Raiders, at the Bengals, home for Detroit, at Green Bay, and then or home for Green Bay, then at Detroit again. So the total is 173. And the only reason that this is not the hardest in this division is because their flight totals, where are they? Here they are. Their away games, they don't travel besides the Raiders game. Okay, they do go to Las Vegas. Besides that game, every game is within 2 hours. So they're not going to have to deal with that aspect of the schedule that some of these other teams are going to have to go through. They got really lucky with the way that, I mean, you talk about some of these games. If they would have gone to LA to play the Chargers, or they would have had to go to San Francisco to play the 49ers, this could all look a lot different. Even like games like New Orleans being at home. I mean, yeah, I mean, I was looking to see if there was any other, but just most of their opponents are close. And if you don't think that matters, look at the schedule or the overall record for teams that have gone to London, played in a game, and didn't get a bye week the next week. It's ridiculous. I think it's like 1-8. This stuff does matter. Where you have the bye week matters. So let's see here. There is there, I'm trying to see, is there a game here where Minnesota, no games. Okay, so Minnesota has no games played against teams coming off of a bye. Okay. So that helps Minnesota a lot too. So there are some, there are some things that you can like about the schedule, but overall, I'm going to tell you right now, and that's maybe they win Tampa. Okay. Then they lose to Philly. They lose to the Chargers. I'm going to say they beat the Panthers. They lose to Kansas City. I'm going to say they lose at Chicago. They lose versus San Francisco. So when we get to week 7, you're looking at a 2-5 team. Okay. Now, how this team responds to being 2-5 will ultimately be the kind of year Minnesota has. Now, we've seen teams that are, look at Detroit last year. What are they? 1-8, and they turned their whole entire season around. 1-7, and then they go on 8 wins out of 9 weeks. So some teams have the ability to do that. Now, what worries me about Minnesota is that they had the opposite last year. Somehow they found a way to win every game. Like I said, negative point differential, 12 wins, never happened before. Does this team have what it takes to be 2-5 and start climbing back and, winning a couple games and getting into the playoff picture? There's really no break in the schedule. Okay. You could say Chicago's a break. They're supposed to be better. And it's a divisional game. I don't care who it is. Prime Patriots playing the Dolphins. The Dolphins won one of those games. There's always, going to be heavy competition within divisional games, and Minnesota is no exception. So you're looking at your easiest game being what? You got Chicago twice, Carolina, Tampa. That's it. That is it. Maybe the Raiders, we'll see. But the Bengals, Detroit twice out of the last 3 weeks to end the season. Minnesota, I think, is looking at a 6-12 year. And I think that, that might be on the high side. Because look, Minnesota is their over-under's 8.5. I understand what they did with Brian Flores. Their defense should be better, but I don't think that it's going to be good enough. I think that they're going to fall back this year. Okay. And then the final team, and the team that most people are most excited about, let's be real, is the Detroit Lions. There's a reason the NFL picked them and wanted them to open up the season. We enjoy watching them. So I have Detroit in third place with division strength. I just want to look at it and verify. Detroit, Minnesota. Here we are, Detroit Lions. Okay. So also Minnesota's final score 173. Okay. 173 was their almost spit total value. The Packers were at 180. This is not a big margin. Like, the Packers have a harder schedule, but I mean, it's right there. I mean, it's 1A and 1B. Okay, Minnesota though, or Detroit though, has a total of 165. Okay, now we're getting into kind of a significant difference here. This isn't 4 points. This is 25 points almost. So Detroit, obviously, their hardest game of the year is the first game of the year. And they might lose this game, okay, against Kansas City. In all reality, they should lose this game. This is a 16.3 total score on this game. That is the highest of any game in any of the NFC North. There's not a game with a higher total than 16.3. Why? Well, it's at Kansas City. That's 11.5 right there. Plus 2 points because this is the home opener. We're giving extra points for the home opener. 2.8 for flight time. And 1 time zone. You're jumping 1 time zone. So this goes from 13.5, although, we add it all up, 16.3. That's going to probably be an L for the Lions. But if they can find a way to win that game, they should feel good about that because if they can win that game, then there's not a team that they play this year that they cannot beat, and they will know right away. There are other games that are going to be challenging, worth pointing out. At Dallas, this is week 17, so they play Minnesota on the road, then Dallas on the road. So Dallas is a 9.5 plus 2 for back-to-back away games. Takes them to an 11.5 plus 2.91 for flight time. And of course, the plus 1 for the time zone. And Dallas is a 14.41. So I have that as their second hardest game. And then, oh, no, actually, that's their third hardest game. By 0.9 points, week 10 is their second hardest game. And it's the Los Angeles Chargers in LA. And that's just because of time zones and flying. But, I mean, besides that, all the other opponents are the same. Their flight time is not that bad. They are flying a total of 21 hours and 6 minutes. That's nothing. Like we saw, I think the Giants were flying like 38 hours, or it might have been 28 hours. But still, that's 7 hours more of flying. So they get 21 hours and 6 minutes of flight time this year for Detroit. Meanwhile, the Packers, end with 16 hours of flight time. Okay. So actually, Detroit flies more than the Packers. But I guess really why Detroit has a less point score or lower point is because if you actually go through the games, you'll notice that Detroit doesn't have any real problems in their schedule as far as playing a bunch of road games. Like the hardest point it gets is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They have 4 of their last 6 on the road. But besides that, it's on the road for KC, at home for Seattle, at home for Atlanta, on the road for Green Bay, at home for Carolina, at home for or away for Tampa, away for Baltimore. Okay, and then at home for the Raiders. Then a bye week, a nice solid week 9 bye. Then on the road, then at home, then at home. It bounces nicely. Their challenging games are spread out very nicely. Kansas City is going to be a tough game, right? But then they play Baltimore week 7. Okay. Then the Chargers week 10. But Detroit will be coming off of a bye week. So they have a whole 2 weeks to prepare for that Chargers game. And then Dallas would be their next challenging game in Denver if Denver is good. And we'll see about the Saints. But when I look at this schedule, let's say they lose to Kansas City. Let's say they lose to Baltimore. Let's say they lose to the Chargers. Let's say they lose to New Orleans. I'm either going to pick New Orleans or Denver. There's going to be a weird one in there. And let's say they lose to Dallas. And let's say they split the series with Minnesota. This is still an 11-6 football team. So Detroit will be in the playoffs this year. I was listening to somebody the other day that actually predicted that Detroit is going to fall back. I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I look at their schedule. Their hard games are spaced out very nicely. And they really they're the best team in this division right now. So, once again, I do have the Green Bay Packers with the hardest schedule, followed by Minnesota, then Detroit, then Chicago. The NFL has Chicago, Minnesota, Detroit, Green Bay. So that is the NFC North. I'm going to break all this down in a video. I'm actually going to screen record my computer so you can see it. I will show you really quick what it looks like. As you can see, where's my mouse? Everything's backwards. There we go. I have every game laid out, every bye week, and the over-under to start the season. And this is the entire NFC North, and I'm going to do every single division. So we can have a real strength of schedule. I was watching the Pat McAfee show, and they were talking about the Broncos, and they said, do you think that it was the dude with the long hair? He was like, does strength of schedule matter? Because I'm a Patriot fan, and they have us at number 4. And it was Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero. And they were like, no, it doesn't matter because all it counts for is last week. And I was like, dude, how does everybody know that this is a problem? Especially in we're in this era where everybody cares about stats and numbers and Amazon. I'm just surprised that everybody, we've all diagnosed the same problem, but this doesn't exist yet. I think this algorithm is going to be something that, we're going to follow closely this year. Because what if I notice a trend that if on, let's say the Saints play the Jaguars, okay? And let's say for the Jaguars, this is, they're coming off a bye. They've been at home 2 weeks in a row. Let's say it knocks the Saints from a 9.5 all the way down to a 5.5. And let's say for the Saints, they've been on the road 3 weeks in a row. They haven't had their bye. And let's say for Green Bay, it's a, let's say, a 14.5. Okay, if every team that's playing the other team, let's say we can say every game this year where there was a 7 point difference between, the highest number and the lowest number for the same matchup for the team, there may be a trend there where, we were, 10-1 in those type of games. Now that we have the data, we have an entire year to sit back and watch how this actually holds up. Because if this is something that holds up really well and, it's very accurate, it allows us to predict things that normally we forget about. Especially once you get into week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11, you get to week 12 and you've seen so many games and everybody's all over the place. It's hard to keep track of, oh yeah, the 49ers are on their third road game in a row. Oh yeah, Carolina just came off their bye. Now we have a way where we don't have to know exactly what everybody's doing, or remember where everybody's bye week is. We can just look at some numbers, and these numbers tell a story of where that team is in this particular part of the season. And if I see a team that should be, let's say, a 6.5, and I see that it's valued at an 11, there's something there to investigate. How did that game get so high? Then you can dig a little deeper. So this is just something that will be a lot of fun to continue to track this year. Um, I figured that the hardest part of doing this is actually explaining to everybody what I'm thinking, and I can really appreciate you guys actually sitting here and listening, because I know that maybe it doesn't all make sense to everybody, but I have a feeling the more we do this, the easier it's going to get to explain, and I'm really excited to figure out if we have something here. Bill is in the chat. What's going on, Bill? Happy to have you in here on this hump day. So I wanted to go over one other thing. Okay. Sorry, I parched. This guy on Facebook. I'm bringing some Facebook beef to the Only Football podcast. There's a picture with Russell Wilson, and it said, if Russell doesn't figure it out this year, his legacy is definitely on the line. And I commented on it. Now, trust me, this is as a person that wants him to perform well, and also very mad about what happened last year. So I'm in no way kissing his ass. He hasn't done anything for me. So my only comment though was he can't unwin the 100 games he won faster than any quarterback in NFL history. It's already done. He's won 100 games faster than anybody's ever done it. Sure, Mahomes is probably going to beat that, but the point is he did it. If somebody, let's say he sucks for the next 4 years, okay? You can't change what he's already done. I think people forget how long he was playing at a high level. And then there was a guy that was like, yeah, man, like he totally agreed with me. But then there's this guy that went, he did it with one of the greatest defenses. And I said, the Jets had a great defense last year and they missed the playoffs. Now there is hype around the Jets because they have a competent quarterback. Would you look at that? Quarterbacks matter whether you have a great defense or not. Russ won 100 games faster than any quarterback because he had a great defense and because the offense was 8th in scoring in 2018, 9th in 2019, and 8th in 2015. He threw 24 touchdown passes over the final 7 weeks of the season in 2015. He's the only quarterback he was the only quarterback in Seahawks history to throw for 4,000 yards in a season, and he did it 4 times. You're talking about a guy that's already in his 11th year got more passing yards than Joe Montana had with 15 seasons. Give it a rest. Just say you don't like the guy. So, I mean, look, I really thought that this is something that I would like to bring up here on the podcast. Can you tarnish your legacy? And the first person that comes to mind for some reason is Brett Favre. Like, we know all the stuff that he was accused of doing, or that he did rather, in Mississippi. Um, but when we separate, like, those are personal issues, okay? When people talk about greatness, we almost have to separate personal issues. Like, nobody, Terrell Owens was very confrontational when he was in the league. Nobody, when they're thinking about the greatest wide receivers of all time, is holding a grudge about Terrell Owens is the way he carried himself in the field. When time goes on, we just forget about the personal issues and we just compare the player. Okay. But this isn't a personal issue with Russell Wilson. So we're kind of in uncharted territories. We've never seen someone play at a high level as long as he's done it and then be so bad that we've even had to have this conversation. We've seen slow decline. Manning had a pretty rapid decline, but ultimately no one talks about it because he got a Super Bowl ring and retired, even though that defense was the only reason he got it. Tom Brady wasn't looking like, he was in the best shape, throwing his best balls in Tampa at the end of the season, but it just, it was a slow, he still looked like somewhat of Tom Brady. Like Russell Wilson we couldn't recognize that guy. So I guess the question is, can you play at such a low level that somehow you discredit everything that you've already done up to this point? And I have to say that the answer is no. I don't think that no matter how bad you are, that it changes who you were. You will always be like, the books are sealed, man. Those stats will live forever. Those touchdown passes live forever. His jersey's ultimately, I don't know because of the beef that they have, but his jersey should be retired in Seattle. And he should be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. But I guess there were some people that probably felt like Russell Wilson before last year was on the fringe of being a Hall of Famer. Like, he's very close to it, but he's not quite gold jacket yet. And then he had a bad season, and now it's like, oh, now he's even further from it. I kind of understand that point of view, but I just don't know how he hasn't already done enough. Like, if you have a Super Bowl ring, which he does, he should have had 2, if they ran the ball. Which was a defining moment for his career because Tom Brady had, I think he had 3 rings and Russell Wilson had 1. And if they would have ran it, Tom Brady would have still had 3 and Russell Wilson would have had 2. Instead, Russ keeps 1 and Tom gets his 4th. Very big, that was a big separation day. One guy moved back, one guy moved forward. But look, man, if you have a Super Bowl ring, even just one, and you hold records for your team, I think that makes you a Hall of Famer. Aaron Rodgers has 1 Super Bowl ring. Is he a Hall of Famer? Absolutely, he's a Hall of Famer. We got Hall of Famers that haven't even won a Super Bowl. We got Dan Marino, so obviously he checks the boxes that we're looking for in a Hall of Fame quarterback. Steve said Emmitt Smith comes to mind as diminished last 2 seasons of his career. Didn't tarnish him. Yeah. And look, I'm kind of like, I'm going back and forth with just a regular guy. But man, this was on Good Morning Football. This is what the sports media is putting out there. This is what they're projecting. This opinion that he could, undo his accomplishments. And I just wanted to put this on public record and get people's feedback and comments to kind of know where you guys stand with the whole thing, because it's a conversation. I've talked football my whole life. I don't know if it's a conversation I've ever had, probably because I just haven't had to have it. The NFL released 9 bold predictions for 2023. I wanted to go through those really quick. Number 1 was that Sam Darnold beats the Jets in the Super Bowl. You heard that correctly. Sam Darnold beats the Jets in the Super Bowl. Very clickbait-worthy, attention-grabbing prediction, if you ask me. It worked for me. And this is what it said. The 49ers are the best roster in the NFL. 253. They just need to find that number one who's poised to man the game's most important position for San Francisco. Well, Brock Purdy is currently recovering from major elbow surgery, while Trey Lance is still struggling with the forward pass. So in the moment, that leaves Sam Darnold as the guy. And I could see that as a golden opportunity. I've always loved Darnold's raw talent, but he was dealt a raw hand in New York and Carolina. Just ask Le'Veon Bell about Adam Gaze's development, or lack thereof, of the former 3rd overall pick. I've always wanted to see what Darnold could do with better support. Now he's under the watchful eye of offensive genius Kyle Shanahan, flanked by immense talent on both sides of the ball. Offensively, the 49ers boast an assortment of playmakers at running back, receiver, and tight end, as well as a stout offensive line. Defensively, the 49ers finished first in points and yards allowed. I think Darnold has a real chance to take his opportunity and run with it. Therefore, there's a realistic chance I ultimately pick the Niners to win the whole damn thing with my official predictions and Sam Darnold being quarterback. Very interesting take. Very interesting take. I'm going to hit this one really quick. Manning is another one. If not for the injury and missing quite a few games before returning to the playoffs, he would have had a bad final 2 years. But I doubt it would have tarnished him in any way. No, it wouldn't have. You got to understand that in 2012, they almost beat the Ravens. I mean, there was a Joe Flacco Hail Mary to beat the Broncos, and the Ravens won the Super Bowl. So you knew we were right there. In 2013, Denver had more, to this day, with the offensive getting more, pass friendly, the rules getting more point friendly. No team yet has had more points in the first 5 weeks of the season than that 2013 Denver Broncos. 7 touchdown passes week 1. 55 touchdown passes on the season. Still a record that hasn't been broken. And then, of course, a Super Bowl trip to Russell Wilson's first win against us. And then 2014, the Broncos dominated our division. We finished first in our division every year Peyton Manning was here. And it wasn't even close. We dominated. And then he gets the Super Bowl. There's nothing that Manning could have done in that last year to tarnish what happened just 1 year ago. Like, we were in 2014, we lost the playoff game, but it was like just 1 year ago, we were seeing, possibly the best offense in the history of the NFL. The 2013 Broncos will go down with the greatest show on turf. The numbers tell you that it has to be in the conversation. And Steve said, but he was much more liked by most of the NFL fans, where Russell is not. And that's all this is about, man. And that's like, let's not get, too much into the weeds here. Like, this is all this is about. That's why I said, give it a rest. Just say you don't like the guy. That's my last comment. Because you gotta, there's just likable people. And then, Russell Wilson's kind of cringy and nerdy. And people just don't like him. He does it to himself. Like, look, he showed up. He lost 40 pounds. I mean, he's skinny now. I guess Sean Payton told him to lose weight because he showed up kind of chunky last year, and he looks good. And you know what he said to the reporters? I feel lean and mean. Who says that? That's not, 6. Or that's not a dad, talking to, their 5-year-old. Ooh, you look lean and mean. He just does things. The high knees on the airplane. He's not a likable person unless, I mean, people his supporters are kind of ride or die. But if you don't like him, you don't like him. I mean, it is very hot and cold. There's really no lukewarm to Russell Wilson. Most people have a problem with him, but I didn't know about it until last year. Like I felt like his cringiness, his nerdiness, all of that was concealed really well in Seattle. I thought "Go Hawks" was something that was cool that he said after every game. But when he came to Denver, I didn't realize it. I thought we were getting "Go Hawks," and then we lose to Seattle, and he goes, Broncos country, let's ride. He says, and he's like stuttering, and it just felt forced. And I was like, we didn't get Go Hawks. I thought we traded for Go Hawks, and we got this new person. Sean Payton is going to bring Russell Wilson back to what Go Hawks Russell Wilson was. And I think that this conversation will be totally irrelevant by week 5. Denver will start the season 4-1 or 5-0. And don't be surprised about it either. It was all the danger. It was all the danger witches that made him overweight. That is so funny. And he's like, when he starts whispering, what does he say? Shh, it's hot. Don't tell anyone. Oh God, what does he say? Oh God, I don't know. It was something I couldn't even watch it. That's why I can't remember. Most narcissists like Russell are not liked. It doesn't mean they're not good at what they do or have done. They're just not liked due to their personality. Yeah, I could see that Russell Wilson being like so consumed within himself that he is living in some kind of alternate reality almost. That's kind of what it feels like. Um, yeah, the best thing Denver could have ever gotten is somebody that is clearly more important than Russell Wilson. Like Nathaniel Hackett, the first time head coach, Russell Wilson walked around and was like, I'm the most important person everywhere I go. Not anymore. Russell Wilson is, he has a daddy now. And I think that is exactly what he needed, was a daddy. So yeah, I just wanted to share that little story with you guys. He said at least he doesn't kick his fingers in front of the cameras. Kick his fingers in front of the cameras. How do you kick your fingers? Kick your fingers in front of the camera. You got me on that one. I've never seen him do that. I did want to say the next team that we're going to be doing is the NFC East, and I'm going to be doing that tomorrow. So I'm leaving at 4 a.m. So I kind of got to wrap this up because I got to pack still, and then I'll be in San Diego tomorrow, and I'll be going live from a hotel room. Oh, at least he doesn't lick his fingers in front of the cameras. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that makes way more sense. So I'll be in California tomorrow. The lighting might be off. The room might be dark, but you know what? I'm bringing the mic. I'm bringing the laptop. I'm bringing the other laptop with all the data, and we're going to go through, the NFL news. And I got some really cool questions. I'm going to do a segment called Buy or Sell. And I don't want to ruin it. I got some questions, but I don't want to tell you what they are right now because it's going to be a good time. Bill said, when you're in San Diego, remember Rockin' Baja Lobster to eat. You'll love it. I will. Actually, I'll write that down. Rockin' Baja Lobster. It sounds fire. Um, Rockin' Baja. So, yeah, I know I do this a lot, but I just wanted to do it one more time. I just want to say thank you guys for coming in here, being a part of the channel, interacting, liking the video. You guys are the best. You guys are always here. I just really appreciate it. I feel really um, optimistic about where this channel is headed. Um, I'm I'm just I can see the algorithm, I can see the numbers, I can see the shorts that we post. Things are moving in the right direction. Like something like this takes some time. It's not going to happen overnight. And there's some people that don't want to be a part of a channel until it does happen. But it's impossible to get it there if everybody's just waiting for the channel to get to that point. So I have like ultimate respect for you guys because you guys are making it possible for this channel to continue going down this road until we get to that point. And I don't ever want it to be lost on me or on you or you to think that I don't know that. So um, please like, subscribe if you are watching this for the first time. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this content. You can follow me on football at FTBLONLYPODCAST on Twitter. And now Rick, my co-host, he will be back with us soon. And now Rick, ANDNOWRICK. Um, and yeah, check out our other channels, everything else that we got. If you guys enjoy that, right on. We're in the NBA, so check out the other podcast where they talk about basketball. I would love to hop in there on one of them. I'll probably ask them if I can just hop in there and talk basketball with them now that the finals is here. Obviously, I'm kind of torn here. You know, I got roots in Miami, but I'm a Denver Broncos fan and I've always cheered for Denver sports teams. So the way I look at it, I'm going to win no matter what happens. Um, so yeah, man, thank you guys again. And I will see you tomorrow from California Love.